Hello everybody. Last class we talked about the scramble for Africa. This is when European countries were competing for land, power, and resources on the continent of Africa. We're going to continue that discussion today with a little bit of a video here. So just to review from last time, European countries were interested and they were competing with each other to own more land. So to have more land was to have more power. They wanted resources, so both the human resources there in terms of the people of Africa to work for them, and they wanted natural resources, gold, silver, rubber, salt, cotton, gold, all of those different things, and many more. They also wanted a market to sell their products after they made them. So as you recall, before we talked about the colonization of India, so the same story that we're talking about with European countries colonizing and attempting to take over, same thing happened in Africa. So this was all powered by the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution was a period of time where European countries, along with the United States, started to massively develop machinery, and they could start mass producing heavy things, transport materials, weapons, cars, homes, etc., etc. So the major event that led to the division of Africa was called the Berlin Conference. So the Berlin Conference happened, as you can see, in 1884. So prior to the Berlin Conference, as these European countries were competing for land and territory in Africa, there were European countries fighting each other in Africa. Otto von Bismarck, who was the leader of Germany at the time, called together 14 different European leaders, and his goal was to end the fight for land, the fight for power and territory. And this is just really one of the weirdest events in history. During the Berlin Conference, as you can see in the corner, they're pointing to a map here. They drew a giant map of Africa, and they started negotiating who would get what land, what part, and what territory. When all was said and done at the Berlin Conference, these 14 leaders had drawn borders, so they physically used an ink pen on a map, and they drew and decided who would essentially be able to rule which part of Africa. So you saw last time as well that the most powerful countries were those that were able to get the most land. So looking here, Great Britain is in the orange, so they probably have the most land, and not only do they have the most land, having Northeast Africa was extremely valuable because if this map were to continue, this is the Red Sea, this is Saudi Arabia, this canal is a huge trade port. So this was an incredibly valuable piece of land. Also, South Africa is one of the most valuable pieces of land in the fact that it has more gold reserves, and even today has more gold reserves than any other area in the country. The country with the second most would be France. So Britain and France were definitely the two strongest countries at the time, getting almost all of West Africa. Some of the lesser powers here, like Germany, they got a few small pieces here and there in German Southwest Africa and German East Africa. Belgium got the Congo, which is a big area, but it's heavily forested. So not a particularly valuable piece of land. And Spain got, if you look up here, Spain got this little tip right here, which is actually in the Atlas Mountains, so it's a pretty invaluable or not valuable piece of land. So I'll go back here. The Scramble for Africa, this political cartoon illustrates the Scramble for Africa in the sense it's representing Africa as a cake. So essentially they're taking a continent, they're treating it like a cake. They're taking their cake knife and they're cutting up pieces of cake for each person. So the most powerful people get the most cake. You know, in terms of natural resources too, if you're like me, you like that corner piece of cake that's got a whole bunch of icing or good resources on it. Not only would the most powerful countries, the Britons and the Frances, get the most cake, but the cake with the most icing. So it's just mind-blowing to think that 14 leaders can come together and decide that we now own all of Africa, and these are our claims now. Going with the Industrial Revolution, there were so many technological advancements that Europe was making at the time that allowed them to conquer almost 98% of an entire continent. So some of these are the steam engine, which allowed boats to get from point A to point B, so travel to Africa, and then as they would go inland, like in the Belgian Congo, that would be done like on the Congo River. Method of getting quinine from the cinchona tree. Malaria was a disease that could be easily caught by Europeans in Africa as they didn't have antibodies to the disease, so that was a remedy for malaria. Telegraph is the first long-range communication, so as they are conquering, as they're establishing colonies, they can communicate with the homeland for orders. The Bessemer process, as invented by Henry Bessemer, was a quick way of manufacturing steel. In terms of warfare, the Maxim gun was extremely important because it was kind of like the repeating rifle. It was an automatic weapon, so extremely deadly. And I mean, very, very sad here, but these Europeans would come to these villages with claims that this is now British territory, and the Africans would put up types of resistance, but you would have Europeans that had this type of weaponry fighting, in many cases, people who had spears and shields. So those battles were quick, and they unfortunately were fatal and went in the direction of the Europeans, almost always. So as you can see here in this image, you see the European soldiers standing around their newly conquered African citizens. So Africa was a continent, and still to some extent today is a continent with just unbelievably valuable natural resources. But as you can see in this cartoon, all those resources left Africa, and they are benefiting Europe. So after they were conquered and colonized, many of these Africans were forced to work in industries that would be profitable only to the Europeans. So this is actually a gold mine that you see here. So these Africans that might have performed many different jobs prior to this, they had no choice. They became gold miners, and you can see them working in the mine here. So not only did the Europeans conquer Africa for natural resources, there was this feeling at the time that the European way, especially the British way, was the best way, and anyone who did not act in that way was wrong. So it was the belief, the mindset that we are the best race in the world, the Europeans believed. And because of that, everyone should be like them. So this whole thought process developed into what was called the white man's burden. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go send your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught sullen people, half devil and half child. So serving a captive's need. If someone is being held captive, it's like they're being held against their will. So the newly conquered Africans are being described as captives here. It's ugly. This is ugly stuff here. They're also described as half devil and half child. So the Europeans looked at some of their uncivilized ways, some of the pagan religions, some of the rituals, the ceremonies, the multitude of languages, and thought that it was barbaric and they should be acting more like Europeans. So Cecil Rhodes was one of these people, and this quote is just unbelievable in how well it just summarizes this mindset that they truly believe they were the greatest race in the world. I contend that we, the Britons, are the finest race in the world. And the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. More territory means more Anglo-Saxon, white race. We are the best, the most human, most honorable race the world possesses. So this quote, and we look at this in 2020, and I really like doing this in class because as I'm reading this, the looks on people's faces are just like, he said what? What? And that's totally right. We know that there is no race today that is any more honorable, any more human, that all of our differences are valued, and that all races really together, I mean, contribute just everything. But to look at this here, this shows the mindset of the Europeans wanting to change every aspect of the life of the Africans. So he's saying the more the world we conquer, the better it is for them because they will become like us. So this political cartoon illustrates this white man's burden. You see a soldier here who is carrying a half devil, half child, and this is a representation of someone from Africa up to a schoolhouse here. Granted, I mean, today we know we appreciate each other's differences, we learn from each other's differences, but these people who are conquering and colonizing, just like the Europeans did to the Native Americans in our country, are trying to completely change their ways of life. So I believe you saw this in your PowerPoint last week. So in addition, there's no story in history that's all good and all bad. There are positives in everything. Although people's lives are being changed, they are being forced to work, they're losing their freedom in many cases. There are some Europeans who looked at this as an opportunity to improve the lives of others, and many missionaries went to Africa, not necessarily to force people to change their lives, but to give them maybe a more modern, a more healthy, and more sanitary life. So the European lady on the right side is a Christian missionary. So what she did is she took a picture of a family in a Kenyan village on the left side. So this is when she got there. So you can tell the living arrangements here, hut held up by sticks. The clothes look maybe rough, dirty. The people don't look particularly healthy in the picture on the left. So after they set up their Christian mission on the right side, you can see a brick building. So the building on the left, to me, it looks like a gust of wind out of the southwest at 20 miles an hour might blow it down. You see a pretty sturdy building here. Also, you see kind of a more Europeanized, quote-unquote, clothing, dress, attire on the right side here. Is it a coincidence or a staged photo that the people on the right are smiling? Not sure, but people look happier, maybe a little bit healthier on the right side than they do on the left side. So even though there were people with this mindset that we need to change people's lives, that in doing so at the expense of taking people's freedom away, which we know is awful, there were some people who sought to do good in Africa, like this missionary. Okay, I hope everyone's having a great day. As always, you're welcome to send me a Canvas message if you have questions about anything. See ya.